Hello, welcome back to More to the Story. I'm your host, Janna Maron. In addition to this podcast, I also publish a literary arts magazine called Under the Gum Tree. We publish creative nonfiction and visual art. You can learn all about the magazine submitting and subscribing. And as I've been mentioning in episodes recently, we really need the support to keep publishing. It's almost our 14-year anniversary, and if we're going to keep going, we need support. So head on over to underthegumtree.com and learn about submitting or subscribing. I didn't mention this on the last episode, but we have a new submission option for Under the Gumtree where if you want to pay a little bit higher fee, I think it's $25, you can get feedback on your work from the editors. So check that out over at underthegumtree.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Cafe Santoro, which is my parents' boutique coffee shop and coffee roastery here in Northern California. And if you're like any writer that I know, you love your coffee. So head on over to cafesantoro.com/Janna for... I should have looked this up. I apologize. Keeping things easy over here as always. There's a discount available. I don't remember what it is, 10 or 15% maybe off your first order. And check out the decaf. It's my favorite roast. You will never know it's decaf. That's the thing that people always say about decaf from my parents is that they'll try it and argue with us that it's not decaf, when in fact it is decaf. It's the only thing I drink. And you can also book a 15-minute diagnosis call with me for identifying what's going on with you and your book project. So you can do that at moretothestory.co/book-diagnosis. And I'd love to chat with you, love to meet you, love to hear all about what you're working on. And this is part 2 of the genre conversation that I started in the last episode. And I'm recording this back to back. So I literally hit stop on the last episode and I'm recording again because all of this is kind of fresh in my mind. And I realized that while I kind of took a little bit of a break in between the 2 recording sessions, I just went and grabbed some water and stuff. I should have said this on the previous episode that there apparently is some sort of construction going on right behind my house, like right on the other side of my back fence. And the room that I'm in is the back room of the house. And so apologies if you're hearing construction background noise. You know, sometimes when you plan to record, things just don't go your way. And I'm getting ready to go out of town in a couple days. And I wanted to get these podcasts recorded so that they would be done before I leave and I could work on processing them and getting them scheduled while I'm gone and still have stuff like publishing and posting while I'm traveling. And so I couldn't wait to do these recordings anymore. Plus also, as I mentioned in the last episode, I've been recording things out of order and I have these client interviews kind of banked where I keep saying, oh, I should do an episode on genre and I should do an episode on why I don't do book outlines for memoir. That's what this episode is going to be about. And I should do an episode on, X, fill in the blank. There's a couple others I think that I keep saying, oh, look for that episode coming soon. Look for that episode coming soon because I recorded those interviews first. And then as I was scheduling them and planning them, suddenly I'm like, no, I really should have those other topics recorded and published before these conversations so that there's a little bit more context for these conversations. So that's what I'm doing for you now. And I'm also realizing that I did that whole long episode on genre talking about hybrid memoir, memoir-plus, prescriptive nonfiction, and I forgot one of the most important things I wanted to do in that episode is introduce this term that I'm now currently using for prescriptive nonfiction books that incorporate personal story. I call memoir-ish. And the reason for that is memoir-plus or hybrid memoir or whatever, those books prioritize the memoir part of the story. It's personal story, personal narrative first, with this support, this supplemental part of the plus, whatever the plus is, the research, the critique, the commentary, the interviews, supplement the personal story. They expand the personal story to make it more applicable and universal and etc. So that's memoir plus. Memoir-ish is kind of like the opposite of that, where it's prescriptive. It's a version of how to self-help business. And that is the primary focus of the book, teaching the readers whatever it is that the author wants to teach, but it's supplemented and supported by the personal story. So for me, this idea, this concept of memoir-ish makes sense to talk about those type of books because it's still adjacent to this idea of personal story, but the personal story is not the forward. It's not personal story forward the way that memoir is personal story forward. Does that make sense? So I'm going to start using that term memoir-ish from now on because I'm getting clients who are writing memoir-ish books. The 3 clients I mentioned that I've done outlines for are writing memoir-ish books. And I'm going to tell you about a client who I worked with, and she's actually now moving forward with her book after we did her outline. She came to me and she thought she was going to write a memoir because she wanted to write about her personal story and her personal experience. It was in the context of kind of like why she is the way she is and why she does things the way that she does things with her clients. Why does who she is and how she does things benefit her clients in the way that they do? That her unique approach benefits her clients. Why? And it's because of how she grew and developed and the experience that she's been through in her life that have made her the person that she is today. But she's telling me all of this, and she's telling me these personal stories, and in context of how that then turns into the way she relates to her clients. And so I said to her, "Oh, it sounds to me," and I'm again, I've done this in past episodes where I'm being intentionally vague and general with this example because I don't have permission to disclose specifics of this person's personal story. So just kind of go with me here. So she's telling me all these personal stories, and then they always relate back to how she interacts with her clients and how her clients get these takeaways because of how she interacts with them, how she approaches them, what she does with them, etc. And I said to her, "Oh, it sounds to me like you want to write not a memoir, but a self-help book." And suddenly she was like, "Oh." And then she asked me the question right away, "But where does my story go in there?" And I said, "Well, just the way you've been talking to me. Your story supplements and supports this process that you have for your clients. You're going to talk about this process that you have for your clients and how and why you developed this process because of your personal experiences." And it was like this light bulb clicked for her. It was like this switch flipped in her brain where suddenly she was like, "Oh, you mean I could do both?" And I said, yes, you can do both. And what that is not a memoir. That is what the industry calls prescriptive and what Janna Maron calls memoir-ish. And that's because the personal story is not the thing that is forward in the book. It's not personal story forward. It's self-help forward supplemented by personal story. And not only is that a very different type of book, but it's a very different process in my mind and my approach and experience in the way that I work with prescriptive books versus the way that I work with memoir and personal essay. And the reason for that is when you have a prescriptive book, it's in the definition of prescriptive. It's a prescription, meaning the author has already determined here is the process. Here are the steps. Here are all the ways that if you do this, if you implement this, if you go 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and even if you do them out of order, sometimes you can have a prescriptive book where the order doesn't really matter that much. It's maybe like choose your own adventure, but there still needs to be an order to the sequence of the book, of course. But if you have something like that, it's a process, it's a framework, it's a step-by-step implementation, do this, do this, do this, do this, That is a prescription. That is something you're trying to teach your clients or your readers in a book. That is something you want your readers to journey through from start to finish. They're going to be at one place when they start the book, and they're going to be at a different place when they finish the book. Ideally, right? Assuming that they take action and implement the things that you're writing about and that you're teaching them. And so when we have those type of books, it really is a matter of distilling that process, getting it down on paper, yes, in a numbered format. And guess what? That numbered format turns into your table of contents or your book outline. And then we think about, okay, what are the personal stories or client stories? That is still a personal story, by the way, because you're not going to leave. If you're telling a client story, you're not going to leave yourself out of the story, because that client story is about how what you did for them benefited them and helped them and improved their situation in some way, whether it's in their business or their personal life. I totally just lost my train of thought. Okay, again, this is what happens when I don't take notes, and I didn't even have any notes for today because I literally was like, this is part 2 of what I started in the last episode, and I know exactly what I want to be talking about. So those stories, personal stories and client stories, we then look at your book outline and we think, okay, tell me this story. What's that story about? Here's where it goes in the outline. Next story. What is that story about? What is the outcome? What is the learning experience? What is the takeaway? Okay, here's where that story goes in the outline. And yes, I can do this with clients. I have done it now with 4 clients where we are on a Zoom call. They have this book idea. The woman who I was just talking about, she wanted to write a memoir. She starts talking to me and telling me about what the book is going to be about and how she's like helped all these clients. And I'm thinking, well, that's not a memoir, because you really want it to be more about how your approach is helping people change and heal and improve their lives. And you want your book to do that for your readers, right? Yes. She said yes. And I said, okay, then that's a self-help book. So what we're going to do is you're going to talk and tell me, you have a new client who comes to you. They're brand new. What's the first thing you do with them? And then what's the next thing you do with them? And what's the next thing after that? And what's the next thing after that? And we came up with this complete book outline, including these client examples, including her personal story examples. And I can do that in about an hour. Sometimes it's maybe like 90 minutes. But it's literally you talk, I type. You talk me through your process, your framework, your steps, your program, whatever it is. You tell me the stories and the successes. You tell me the stories about how you developed this program. Sometimes the stories are not client stories. Sometimes they really are just personal stories because they are about how you developed this program or this system and how it first benefited you. Oftentimes in these type of books, the author is the first client. They're their own first client. They're doing things that they figure out and work for themselves first, and then they go and help other people with this system that they've created. And so developing that system or program is part of the story, because there's a reason you came up with that in the first place. Something was happening in your life that probably readers can relate to that caused you to think about, what can I do differently? How can I change this? What can I implement? Right? You have that brain that's like, I got to do something to improve my situation here. And you figured it out. And you figured out that, oh, if this worked for me, it could probably work for some other people. Excuse me, sip of water, because now I've been talking for almost an hour and a half since I recorded that 40-minute episode right before this. So it's a combination of personal story and client story, because developing your system or program is all personal story, how you developed your system. And then once you started seeing results for other people, those are your client stories. And you're still in those stories because, as I said, it's all about how you and that client work together. And so if you have these stories collected regardless of whether they're written down anywhere, they're probably in your head because you probably use them in other ways. You use them, if you're in business, if you're in the online business space, you use these stories when you post on social media, when you do reels or videos, when you do podcast episodes, whether you're hosting or you're a guest. If you do any sort of public speaking, you're using these stories. If you're writing emails to your email list, you're using these stories. If you're doing blog posts or anything where you're out there talking about your business, you are telling these stories, regardless of whether it's about you and how you came up with your system or how you started your business or whether it's a client success story. You are telling these stories. So regardless of whether you have them written down anywhere, you know them. They're in your head. They're in your head. They're a part of you. They're integrated into your very being at this point. If you've been in business and for any amount of time and you're thinking about a book, generally you're not thinking about a book if you just went into business yesterday. But if you've been in business for any amount of time and you're thinking about a book, these stories are a part of you. And so what I do is I listen to you talk and I just organize it. I distill it. I synthesize it. I'm like an IA for your book. Hey, maybe IA could do this for you, but not in the way that I can. And believe me, there are uses for IA. I do use it for myself in my own business. Creating show notes for this podcast is one of those uses, which I disclaim on every show notes post, just so that we are clear exactly on what's Janna and what is repurposed Janna by a robot. Okay? But if you have been thinking about writing a book and you come from the online business world, this is how I approach your book. We come up with an outline first. And the reason for that is you probably have this system internalized so that it's like second nature to you and you don't even really think through it in a very systematic way anymore. That's why you need someone like me to come along who is objective, who's unfamiliar, who can ask all these questions about like, okay, well, what about this? And then what? What about this? And then what? Right? And I'm very good at doing that and asking questions because if you're familiar with the 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin, one of the 4 tendencies is the questioner, which is me. I am the questioner. So I am very naturally always asking questions, getting clarity. I ask questions to get clarity. This is how we make your book and your book outline as clear as it possibly can be. So I do that for memoir-ish books. The official industry term being prescriptive nonfiction, which if you're new to the show and you're just hearing this episode, it's the very first episode you've ever heard, go back and listen to the previous episode where it's part 1 of this genre conversation and I explain exactly what prescriptive nonfiction is. But I don't do outlines for memoir. And why not? I mean, it would be so much easier to write memoir if we could have an outline, if we could have a map, if we could just look at this outline and work through it methodically and check things off as we go. And I do have a friend or two who have written memoirs with outlines, so it's not impossible. However, the reason I do not do it is most people who want to write a memoir, and this even includes personal essays, which, by the way, in the last episode, I didn't talk specifically about the difference between memoir and essay. I'm not going to get into it right now because generally speaking, personal essay has a lot of similarities to memoir because it's personal. The big difference is it's more of a thought exercise. It's more about thinking and demonstrating your thinking on the page than it is about narrative and story the way that memoir is. But because it's first person, because it's a lot of reflection on a topic or a theme or an event or an experience, there is a lot of overlap between memoir and personal essay. And memoir also does a lot of thinking on the page because we're reflecting on those experiences that we're writing about in the memoir. But generally speaking, So taking a step back here, when we talk about essay, we're talking about short form. Unless it's a collection of essays, then it's a book because there are more than one essay and they're all collected into a book. But if we're talking about memoir, that's long form and it's a book. Now, yes, there is short form memoir. You can publish excerpts of memoirs and blah, blah, blah. But in general, again, very generally speaking here, we kind of go back and forth between essay and memoir when we're talking about the difference between a short form, something that would be published as a standalone, versus something that would be published as a book length long form. Okay? So I do not use outlines for a memoir or personal essay or collections of personal essay or literary or, lyrical is another kind of like subgenre of the creative nonfiction world and the academic world, because most people who come to memoir and personal narrative, well, they just want to write their story and they have all these ideas. Like there's family, there's, growing up in a certain area or a neighborhood, or their relationship with a certain person in their life, whether that's a relative or a friend or a spouse. Or it's a very specific time frame, like there's a lot of coming of age memoirs, right? And there's a lot of discovery that has to happen in the writing. You can't turn that into a formula. There's no discovery if you have an outline. It's very constrictive. Okay? This is a very different type of book. It's a very different approach for each type of book because by definition, prescriptive means there is a prescribed path. By definition, memoir means we're writing from memory. There's no prescription. There's no prescribed path for memory. I mean, if you just sit and drink a cup of coffee and reminisce on your childhood, you know that there's no prescription for that. Your memories do not arrive in chronological order in your mind. There's a lot of connection by association and free flow and free forming that happens. And in my opinion, an outline, what's the word? Cuts that off. There's a word that I'm looking for and I can't come up with it right now. It just kind of like, it's like when you pinch a hose and you like suddenly suffocate it. So if you want to do that kind of writing, you have to be open to the flow and the free form nature. And I often equate figuring out your the structure for your memoir to working on a puzzle. And the reason for that is, okay, maybe if you have a puzzle box with the picture on the box, you know what the puzzle's supposed to look like, but then you take the lid off and there are no pieces. So, okay, great. You know what the end result is supposed to be. You know what the picture of the puzzle is supposed to look like, but you can't work on it because there are no pieces. Your memoir book is very similar. You need to start acquiring some pieces and you need to accumulate material so that you can eventually find the edges and the corners and set up those edges and corners and start to see, oh, this is how this thing is taking shape. These are the other pieces that I need. Let me go ahead and write those pieces and create those pieces and start collecting them and adding them to my box. And once I have all the pieces in the box, I can start arranging them and moving them around and filling in the gaps. And you will start to see where the gaps still remain and what pieces you still need to create. Now, if that sounds way too loosey-goosey for you, like you want a map, then go write a prescriptive book. But if you want to write a memoir or a personal essay collection, that is my approach. Now, there are plenty of people out there who are going to give you formulas for structures and tell you how to outline your memoir. Great. If that works for you, awesome. I have not seen that work for my clients. And the reason for that is several clients come to me after having worked on their memoirs for years. And I'm talking like 10, 15 years, and they are stuck and they are spinning their wheels and they don't know what to do with their manuscript. They have all this material, 25, 30, 40, sometimes 50,000 or more words, sometimes 1,000, 100,000 words, and they don't know what to do with all of this material. They are just writing, collecting, and they don't know how to organize it. So yes, I can also help you organize existing material. That is called a manuscript review or developmental review, and I do offer that as well. But the best place to start is with a book diagnosis because, like I've been saying, most of these clients come to me and they don't know what they need. So we can talk about where you are with your project, where you're stuck, what's happening for you in that book diagnosis call, and I will give you my diagnosis of next steps and what I think can help you, including potentially working with me. But hey, if it's not me, then it's not going to be me, because I had a client book a call. She's not a client because she booked a call with me and come to find out she already has 80,000 words and an agent. Well, she doesn't need a book coach. And I told her that. We spent a little bit of time talking and I gave her some ideas, but she doesn't need a book coach. So if you don't need a book coach, I will tell you that. But anyway, what I was saying is these clients come to me with all this material. They've been spinning their wheels for years, literally years. And they don't know how to organize their material. Even after looking at all these other formulas for structuring memoir and blah, blah, blah. And let me tell you, my diagnosis is that it really comes down to a couple things. They've lost sight of who they are as a writer. They've lost confidence in their own voice and their own ability. They've lost confidence in their own work. They have forgotten how to trust themselves and how to trust the work. Because, yes, maybe this is what I'm about to say is going to sound very woo-woo and magical and whatever. But if you don't believe that creative work is magical, go read the book Big Magic and then come back to me and we'll have a conversation. But the work will tell you what it needs. It can only tell you what it needs if it exists. So no, I am not going to tell you to write an outline for your memoir or your personal essay collection because that is prescriptive. And you need to generate material and allow the material to tell you what it needs. And I have clients who will verify this process, clients who have been spinning their wheels on their book manuscript for years and years and years, and I am coaching them through this process. And yes, I am helping them by giving them some feedback and some recommendations and some ideas. Sometimes you do need that for a little bit of guidance and a little bit of just getting you back on track, pointing you off in the right direction, but they are still doing all of the work on their own, just with a little bit of guidance and input, and they will tell you, they will confirm for you that yes, the work does tell them what it needs as soon as they get back into this place of self-trust. Trusting themselves, trusting the work. And so that, my friend, is why I do not do outlines for memoir. And guess what? Even if you're writing prescriptive and you have an outline, you still also need to trust yourself and trust your work. And the work will also tell you what it needs. Because maybe you're working through your outline and suddenly you're like, oh, there's this thing I forgot. And I need to include this. And you're going to look at your outline and it's going to show you exactly where it belongs in the outline. And the work will do that for you, but you have to be in the work to do it. Wow, I did all of that in 30 minutes. I'm going to end there. And I'm going to remind you about booking a diagnosis call with me, because how you hear me speak on these podcast episodes is exactly how I will speak to you on the call. I will be gentle with you, but I will be enthusiastic and impassioned, just as impassioned as I am when I'm talking here on this podcast. Those are the signature qualities and natures of an Enneagram 8 and a manifestor, human design manifestor. And some of this energy will rub off on you. If you're feeling unmotivated, if you're feeling stuck, even if all you need is a little jump start, you can get that in a book diagnosis call, even if we never work together. And that's perfectly okay with me. I've designed these book diagnosis calls so that I can give you what you need in a short amount of time, and it will still serve you, and it's not going to totally drain me and my capacity and my energies. So moretothestory.co/book diagnosis. I'll give you a little burst of my energy to point you in the right direction and help you figure out your next steps. Don't forget to visit Under the Gumtree at underthegumtree.com. Don't forget to get yourself some coffee and fuel all of this work that you're going to be doing on your book project at cafesantoro.com/Janna. All of these notes and links, by the way, can be found on the show notes post for this episode at moretothestories.substack.com. The theme song is written and performed by Jeremy Maron. You can follow Under the Gumtree on Instagram at Under Gumtree. You can follow me on Instagram at Janna Marlise. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you very soon on the next episode of More to the Story.